Hola, buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Silvia Arroyo. I'm the coordinator of this cycle, Tech and Society, on the part of Fundación Telefónica. Welcome to a new session of this cycle that we organized together with Aspen Institute Spain. This is a project that we launched in 2017, and the goal is to show how technology is affecting and transforming our lives. We are dealing with topics such as how technology affects the labor relations or interpersonal relations, or even how it is affecting international relations. The event that we have today, we have Jennifer Bradley with us. She is our guest, and she is the manager of the Center for Urban Innovation of the Aspen Institute US. And we will have Juan Lobato, who is the city mayor of Soto del Real, and he's going to talk about the transformation that cities are going through. All these talks are available in our webpage at Fundación Telefónica. Besides that, we also upload interviews that we have done with the guests and other things that we consider interesting. And with all that, we will make a brief summary, a publication that will be available for free online for the beginning of 2020, I guess. And I invite you all to have a look at that. Since this is the last Tech and Society of the year, I would like to thank the two teams that have been working on this on this topic for the year. I'm going to read them out. On the part of Aspen Institute Spain, Montserrat, Gabriela, Santiago, Isabel, Nick, Anika, Beltrán, and Jose María. And on the part of the Fundación Telefónica team, my colleagues Laura, Pablo Rodríguez, Andrés, Marisa, and Pablo Gonzalo. Thank you very much for attending. I turn the floor over to Jose María de Vinza, who is the Secretary General of the Aspen Institute Spain. Good afternoon, and thank you, Silvia. It is for me a pleasure to be present in this last session of the third edition of this cycle with such an interesting topic, smart cities, the future of our cities, and technological transformation, and asking ourselves the big questions in this venue for reflection. How can we make more inclusive, more humane societies, and how we can take advantage of the advantages of technological change for to benefit everyone. And I think it is great to have with us Jennifer Bradley to close this session, and I thank all for the collaboration with Fundación Telefónica. She is a pioneer that has always been ahead of all of us when it comes to discussing the future of cities in the US. She also has a very interesting experience as an activist in the world of law for public interest, and she is the founder of this Center for Urban Innovation at the Aspen Institute, and we thank her for coming to Spain. And I would also like to thank Juan Lobato, who is a mayor of Soto del Real, and he's also an alumni of the Aspen Institute Spain. He always helps us with this cycle, and we want to create a cross-sectional, transversal platform for discussion. And so thank you very much, and thank all of you also for attending. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Gracias. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody in Fundación Telefónica and my friends in Aspen, Spain.
I understand everyone starts with 2 sentences of Spanish. Now I've done that, and I can return to English, where I can speak maybe a little bit more intelligently. I'm very grateful to be here today in this beautiful city to share some thoughts and some provocations about the future of cities and what truly makes a city smart in the age of technology. It's especially meaningful for me to be sharing these ideas here in Madrid. 30 years ago, when I was a student, I spent a summer studying art history and Spanish language in Toledo. And unfortunately, I remember more about the art history than I do about Spanish verbs and proper conjugations. But but I trace my love of cities, and therefore my career, to the experience of daily life in Toledo, to riding the bus from the Polígono Industrial into the heart of the city, and to trips to Madrid, to El Rastro and the Prado, and long afternoons here. Spain taught me to love cities, to love walking, listening, and discovering. Spain showed me that cities could be synonymous with delight. The idea of cities as places of discovery, both practical discoveries such as technological innovations, but also everyday discoveries such as a new favorite place for coffee or a new artist, underpins my talk today. I'll start by exploring what a city is and what makes cities great, and look at cities' historical, social, and economic roles. Next, I'll discuss some of the ideas about the smart city or the digital city. Most of my work in this area comes from North America. That's just where I've done most of my research. I believe that European city governments are a bit more skeptical about the promise of smart cities. And I think that's because Europeans have a richer and deeper experience of urban life and less mistrust of their cities. I'll describe how some of the tenets of the smart city, particularly the focus on efficiency and a lack of friction, are antithetical to what has historically made cities great. And finally, I'll share some thoughts about the role of cities in a technological age and the role of technology in an urban age. If you start by looking at the history of cities and what makes them great, you will see that the idea of city planning is something of an oxymoron. Cities are places that refuse to be planned. They are places of messiness and spontaneity, and sometimes even of unease and discomfort. And that is the secret to their success. Cities grew as centers of exchange, where people came from one place to trade with people from another place. At first, the trade was mostly in goods, grains for spices, woven fabrics for metals. But I imagine that the traders began to talk to each other. They started to share stories of the places that they came from. They started to share ideas. And it is the exchange of ideas, much more so than the exchange of goods, that made and continues to make cities great and generative. Cities expose people to a huge range of ideas about what makes a good life and how to live it. And that's why people have at times been fearful or disparaging of cities, even as artists and writers and critics who challenge our ways of thinking and seeing have been drawn to cities. There's nothing new about disruption. Cities are the original places of disruption of old ideas and old ways of life. Cities are also important to material well-being. Cities and their surrounding metropolitan areas generate an outsized share of national wealth from country to country. Research has shown that cities are also good for people in their role as workers. Workers gain what's known as a skills premium, meaning simply that they get smarter and better at their jobs when they move from outside of a metropolitan area into a metropolitan area. And the skills that they gain and the premium that those skills bring stays with them when they leave, which suggests that cities enable their residents to get smarter and more skilled more quickly than other environments. There are more opportunities to learn and grow, and more competition, which pushes faster improvement. Cities are also where innovations tend to cluster, and this has been the case for centuries. The historian Thomas Bender has found that between 1866 and 1886, which is when Thomas Edison was perfecting the commercially viable light bulb, 80% of his fellow inventors in things related to telegraphs, and essentially the telegraph technology was how Edison learned about electricity, so it was kind of a fundamental precursor technology for commercial electrification. 80% of Thomas Edison's intellectual peers who were most prolific lived in or within commuting distance of New York. Thomas Edison perfected the first commercially viable incandescent light bulb in 1879 in his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. But he depended not only on fellow inventors, but also craftspeople, engineers, financiers, and lawyers. he needed not only a laboratory, but also a marketing hub and a large-scale demonstration site, which he found at 2 places in the city of New York. This mix of readily accessible expertise, ingenuity, space, and inspiration could only be found in a metropolis like New York, Paris, London, or Madrid. Now, you might think that this example is confined to the 19th century, because in the 19th century, it was exceptionally difficult for ideas to travel quickly across great distances. So, of course, proximity would have mattered 100 years ago. But even now, even about 150 years after the commercialization of the light bulb, proximity still matters. In the United States, the vast majority of inventors, people who make patents, 82% of them who created patents between 2005 and 2012 lived in one of the 100 largest metropolitan areas. And inventors working within one metropolitan area tend to cite patents from other people working in the metropolitan area. So, for example, if you're an inventor in Miami, you are more likely to rely on inventions of other people in Miami than you are of people in Barcelona or Tokyo or Mexico City or even Houston, Washington, D.C. or San Francisco. If you think about places, again, in the United States like Silicon Valley or Hollywood and New York, there's a tremendous concentration of talent, companies, and venture capital in these places. I find it quite ironic when I recite these statistics that technology, which was supposed to cut the ties between people and place and allow people everywhere to work from just about anywhere, turns out to flourish in fairly compact geographic concentrations even today. And if you look at trends like gentrification, this concentration seems to be increasing, not decreasing, as technology supposedly dissolves the distances between us. I think the reason for this is that innovation depends not on the things that we plan, the interactions or the video phone calls that we can schedule. It depends on spontaneous or unplanned encounters that lead to new combinations of ideas. Cities are successful to the extent that they allow for and in fact encourage the unpredictable. I would take this even further and say that cities are successful to the extent that they are messy and even inefficient. If you look at some of the modern era's failures in city planning at a large scale, you see that places that were designed primarily to be efficient and orderly often fail as cities. The classic example from city planning literature is Brasilia. The modernist public housing complexes in the United States, inspired by the Swiss city planner Le Corbusier, also come to mind. Cities are human endeavors, and like humans, they are most generative because, not in spite of their imperfections and their moments of disorder. Sometimes that disorder is uncomfortable. Cities are places of tension and not necessarily ease. They can overwhelm us with strangeness, a fear of the other, and a weariness of having to be alert all the time. Cities can be delightful, but they can also be very difficult. Urban dwellers live on the tension point between both. And this brings us to the smart city. There's no single definition of what makes a smart city. The term generally suggests an ideology of using technology to make cities more legible, efficient, connected, and predictable, to reduce some of the frictions and discomforts of city life. So we can see at the outset that the idea of the smart city is in tension with what makes cities great, their disorder, their messiness, and their moments of inefficiency. I don't think that tension is necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes I think that tension, that friction, is what causes generativity, in the same way that a flint striking, a match striking a box, right? It's the friction that creates the spark. But we have to acknowledge both sides of the tension. The Urban Institute, a highly respected research organization in the United States, just released a primer on technology and equity in cities, which highlights technology's promises and the challenge in 4 categories: smart infrastructure, shared mobility, platforms that allow residents to engage government agencies, and data and analysis. In each case, researchers found possibilities for gains, but also potential costs, especially for residents who are underserved or disconnected either because of technology, for political reasons, or for economic and social reasons. Technology can enforce disconnection as much as it can bring us together. For example, smart infrastructure generally means embedding sensors in existing physical infrastructure, such as light posts, curbs, and parking meters. This allows cities to collect information and relay it to city leaders who can detect air quality or traffic problems or pedestrian movements. Public Wi-Fi and broadband is also considered smart infrastructure. The Urban Institute notes that combining physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure can connect residents and neighborhoods to information and help cities deliver essential services more efficiently. But it also presents a challenge because technologies can widen disparities in access to basic services, or they can divert resources from equity-focused initiatives. Every dollar, every hour that cities spend on pursuing a shiny new technology solution is $1 and an hour that they're not spending on traditional city concerns, again, like equity, access, and making sure all residents can benefit from the things the city has to offer. Similarly, smart infrastructure can render some neighborhoods highly visible and other neighborhoods completely invisible. Or they might be visible in some ways like police surveillance that residents would not want. Uber, Lyft, dockless bikes and scooters can reduce transportation for low-income riders and expand options in underserved neighborhoods. But these services cannot be accessed without credit cards or smartphones, and the coverage of the network may not extend to all neighborhoods. And one of the things that I think we should always keep in mind when we're talking about Uber and Lyft and these transportation startups is that they're heavily subsidized by venture capital. That's what makes them so cheap and so appealing. When venture capital stops subsidizing, the prices will go up. And suddenly public transportation will be a more competitive option. But if we've not been investing in our public transportation, we'll have both crowded streets and crowded train cars. So we have to look beyond just consumer demand for these services and think very closely about the business models as we start to make investments. When autonomous vehicles first burst on the scene a few years ago, people advocated not making big investments in mass transit because autonomous vehicles will come and everybody will ride in an autonomous vehicle. But a street full of gridlocked autonomous vehicles is not different than a street full of gridlocked vehicles with drivers in them, except maybe more people will be on their phones in the backseat of an autonomous vehicle. These are not necessarily improvements in the way that city life can go, but sometimes under the guise of new technology, we get dazzled by what's new and we forget what is sustaining. Data and analytic capacity, right, big data or artificial intelligence, can help city governments spot trends and prevent harms, but data and algorithms are never neutral. It is never a neutral choice what data we collect and how we prioritize it. Data on crime often reflects discrimination and bias in policing. It does not necessarily reveal where crimes are more likely to be committed or who is more likely to commit a crime. Technology cannot tell us everything we need to know about cities, and cities are not primarily technological problems. We would all like transportation to be more efficient and to have more seamless interactions with government agencies that issue permits or collect money for fines. Efficiency is a fine goal for many government services, but the goal of a city and of a government is not primarily efficiency for its own sake. I think it's telling that some of the most ambitious smart city projects, or projects that seek to infuse technology deeply into public space and daily life, are in newly built places. And here I'm thinking about the cities that China seems to be almost manufacturing at a rapid clip, or newly built suburban neighborhoods in the United States, or the Toronto waterfront, where Sidewalk Labs, which is a sister company of Google, has proposed a major redevelopment project on about 800 acres of mostly publicly owned land. And for those of you who are exceptionally interested in the question of cities and technology, I encourage you to learn more about the Sidewalk Labs project in Toronto, particularly reading their initial proffer to the city, their initial response to the request for proposals. It's a document of kind of techno-utopian view of the smart city. And people who care about cities, whether you are excited about the smart city future or you're skeptical or you're resistant, you should know where this is going and what the technologist view of the city is, how deeply they plan to come into and engage the physical realm. Cities will need to have an opinion and expertise about all of these questions. Sidewalk Labs has given us kind of a very interesting map of where the field is going. I think the fact, though, that most of the most ambitious smart cities projects, and again, Barcelona, I think, is an exception, but most of the most ambitious smart city projects are in newer places, shows that the smart city has not yet learned how to deal with the actual city, with the messy human city that is a palimpsest of generations and ideas and old technologies and older ways of life. The Sidewalk Labs project has met with resistance in Toronto, though, and Barcelona has adjusted its smart city strategies to be more responsive to resident needs rather than technological imperatives. There are hard questions and trade-offs where the smart city meets the real-life messy city, and we don't have good methods to discuss these trade-offs as political questions, in part because the inner workings of technology remain opaque and mysterious. The technology tends to get dropped in and adopted without a lot of public debate or understanding of pros and cons. We tend to discover the downsides a bit late. There's not a forward-looking strategy at the municipal level in most places because it's too hard for regulation to keep up. And I hope we discuss later in the Q&A the difference between the time horizons of technology, which are kind of instantaneous, and the time horizons of culture and public decision-making, which are and should be slow. And it's that asymmetry, that asynchronicity, that is causing us so much trouble. In my work, I see city governments and others offering alternative definitions of what it means to be a smart city. They are increasingly challenging the technology-first approach and the unquestioned ideal of efficiency. In a way, they're standing up for the slightly messy, diverse, unplannable city. A few years ago, certainly in the United States, experts argued that governments had to treat citizens more like customers and adopting a business-like approach to public services. There is a place for this idea of efficiency in government, but it cannot be the whole of government in a democracy, and it cannot be the whole of government in cities. The Innovation Office of the City of Boston, which, like Barcelona, wins praise for being a smart city, has made a strong statement, and it's worth quoting at length. They start by saying, "Sensors are not smart. Digital kiosks do not save the world. Efficiency is not democracy. We think a truly smart city is one that creates equal opportunities for people to connect with each other and with the world. It provides ample pathways for its people, not just to optimize it, but to live in it. It's not a laboratory, it's home." I didn't write those words, but I wish I had. We should not measure cities on how many sensors they have per square meter or on how many data sets they connect and open to the public, but on normative, values-based criteria. We should ask questions like, how many people live in poverty? How many children are hungry? How many elderly people are lonely? How many artists can create there? How many jobs exist at good wages? And there are other measures of city success that are less bleak. How many opportunities are there for discovery and delight? How many opportunities are there for unplanned connections? These are not something that an algorithm can easily measure, but these are much harder problems to solve or understand or address than driverless cars or package delivery drones. If technology can free up resources to work on these harder, older human problems, that's all for the good. But we must never confuse tools, and technology is a tool, with outcomes. I've said throughout my remarks that cities are the sites of tension. The smart city tension is, again, determining where to be efficient and then how to use the gains in time or money from those efficiencies to create what urban scholar Eric Gordon calls meaningful inefficiencies, or ways to play within and with rules rather than simply playing out prescribed tasks. Humans are good at play. Algorithms are good at prescribed tasks. And I think most of our frustrating experience in cities toggle between those two. There are the things that should be easy, the routinized, the regular, the routine. Those are things that we should think about smart cities technology for. I think it's fantastic that, for example, I can apply for my driver's license online rather than having to go and wait at a civic office. But there are some times when we have problems that fall between the rules. There are some times in our life when we need someone to say, I understand, you're a special case, you don't fit the rules, or you don't understand which rule to follow. I see that you are special, I can take care of the problem, and I can take care of you. Finding a technology that can support humans behaving in a fair, transparent, and compassionate manner is a task worth taking on. A better smart city, what some people have called a smart enough city or a compassionate city or a user-focused city, knows when to use technology and when to rely on people. Cities' strength is in their messiness, the temporary confusions, disorientations, and frictions. Without those, because those are the things that generate innovation and possibility, cities lose their purpose. So as we think about technology in cities, the visions of Sidewalk Labs or Uber or the myriad other companies trying to remake cities and city government, we have to think about maintaining opportunities for human interaction and creativity. Those opportunities for spontaneous, unplanned, unpredictable, ungovernable exchanges are what makes cities great, not just as generators of ideas and wealth, but as places to live a rich and joyous life. And again, I'll come back to the fact that I'm so pleased to be giving these remarks in Madrid. In some ways, I think the future of the cities might look more like the past, that being able to create cities that can support this kind of density, this kind of diversity over not just decades, but centuries upon centuries is, I think, the goal of urbanists and technologists and what we should all be striving for. So perhaps rather than the smart city, we should look for the enduring city. And on that, I think you have much to teach the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Jennifer.
you.
Can you listen to me? Yeah. So thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have so many people here in this rainy afternoon. So you made the effort to come here, and we do appreciate you're here. First of all, I want to thank you, Aspen Spain. Thank you so much for the invitation, and Fundación Telefónica. It's a great honor for me being here. I was part of several seminars of Aspen and Fundación and Telefónica Fundación years ago, and it's always very interesting, this share of ideas and feelings and thoughts, and it's a great pleasure to me. And of course, that great pleasure being here with Jennifer, which is a very inspiring woman, as you just checked. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your speech, as I just told, it was very, very inspiring. And we are about to have a conversation, and after that we love to have a Q&A. We're looking forward to that, so prepare your questions. It's your opportunity to let her know about your thoughts and translate and speak about your questions. But I would like to start with one thought I have. Usually when we talk about smart cities, we quickly think about technology. It's like, oh, smart cities, they have a lot of technology, they can use technology for almost everything. To me, as a mayor of a little town here in Madrid, is a city which is smart is not just technology. It's like a city which is smart is the city which is able to understand, to know all the citizens' opinions, all the ideas, It's a city which is able to listen to different projects of not just the citizens, but the companies who are in this city, or the NGOs or the associations. A city which is able to use all that intelligence, all that knowledge, to develop projects to grow up, to be more social. And also I think that this has a lot to do with democracy and participation. So a smart city has to be a city absolutely transparency, and a city which is able to let people participate in different levels. Of course, they are voting every 4 years to choose mayor or to choose the city council, but they have the right to participate every day, letting the government know about their opinions, their vision of how the town or the city is going. And I think this is very important, not just in the way the city is going to develop, but also in the sense of community. People, companies, associations feel part of a community. So they are building something strong. And I think that's an interesting key to develop as a city. So it's not exactly a question, but what do you think about that society part of the smart city vision?
So I think you bring up several interesting points. First, the term smart city is not something that was created organically by people who live in or study cities. It's very much an industry-driven term. So industry, the people who are selling this technology to city governments, decided it would be a great thing to call it smart cities, because who wants to live in a dumb city? So they had a branding advantage. But there is, as I said in my remarks, a bit of a backlash, and people pushing back and saying, no, smart is not equal to technology. The idea of how technology, though, can help us collect and aggregate the voices of people is an interesting one. There were many platforms created through a movement known as civic tech, which were supposed to enable residents to voice their opinions online, have freer communications with local governments. And for some reason, these have not taken off as much as their creators have hoped. They have not replaced the older methods of residents communicating and interacting with their government. I think there is an opportunity for that. Many younger people will probably want to connect more online or through these platforms. Some cities are experimenting with gamification, which is basically just making everything into a video game in how they connect with their younger residents. We also have to distinguish between some of the ideas or processes that come to us from technology and technology itself. So one of the ideas that technology has given us or encourages us to focus on is the idea of the user experience. I don't know if anyone has read The Lean Startup, the idea that before you take your product to market, you should test it extensively with the people who are going to use it. Cities and governments generally have now become much more interested in what their website is like for users, for example, or what their services are like for users. I think those are valuable. It's not necessarily, you don't necessarily use a technology to survey users, but you do bring them in and say, does this work for you? Thinking about user journeys. So that better way of communicating and understanding what residents want is powerful. Also, technology has brought us the idea of crowdsourcing, right? Understanding, again, the way ideas come. Ideas don't always come from experts. And this is a bit difficult for me to say because I have spent my career aspiring to be an expert, and Washington, D.C. is full of experts. But good ideas tend to come from the experience of many people sharing ideas and developing things. So it's absolutely the case that the more cities can learn from all of their residents and hear from all of their residents, the better they will be able not only to meet expressed needs, but also to anticipate new needs. And cities, I think, have a great role to play in trying to bring residents together across lines of class, race, country of origin and history, because again, I think the most functional cities and the most enjoyable cities are ones that have that sense of mixing.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting what you're saying. We spoke before about some pillars that a smart city has to have, and one of those is the space pillar. A smart city needs to have spaces for people to go to connect freely and spontaneously, and not just physical spaces, maybe also on the internet or whatever, no? In this part, it has to be with the urban method to develop your city. Another pillar could be maybe the institutional pillar. How we can develop nets or systems to connect people, companies, NGOs, associations, the government, of course, how that system could work in a good way. And the third one, which is the very interesting one to me, is the cultural pillar. How can we let the citizens know that we want to build this, and we want to let them freely get together, create together, work together, and develop ideas, projects, think about the future of the city, think about the future of their companies or their families or whatever. This cultural pillar is very difficult to put it on work, because it's you have to let them know, and you need time, you need a lot of people stop in this world, stop and thinking about it. And what do you think about this?
So I love the idea that you're moving toward, which is that the street or the public park is an essential part of the smart city. Mm-hmm. And it is, because that's where people come together. That's where people come together to be human, to share experiences, to share ideas, to watch and marvel at the other things that other people get up to. So I do think that the idea of a smart city is something that happens only in front of screens is quite limited and even destructive. And you and I, again, earlier did talk about this notion of time and culture as an element of the smart city. Technological change, I think, always comes too fast. Excuse me. I imagine that when we went from, boats that were propelled purely by humans rowing to boats that were propelled by sail, people thought, wow, I can't get my mind around this. This is too difficult to comprehend. So we have not learned, and maybe we'll never learn as a society, how to combine fast breakthroughs with day-to-day. So we all have our phones, and we're all addicted to phones, and no one had a phone like this 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago. We still didn't have smartphones. The iPhone, I think, debuted in 2007. And so in just 12 years, which is not very long at all, we've engineered all kinds of habits around the cell phone, and we don't necessarily have political tools or cultural tools or stories that have helped us keep up with this change. So it's that combination of old ways of dealing with things, again, stories, community gathering, and this new technology that seems both to try to bring us together, but also can send us into strange, homogenous subcultures. I think the idea of city governments taking upon themselves the task of convening people and bringing people together, not to put my Aspen España colleagues out of business, because that's also what we do well at the Aspen Institute, is a compelling one. With cities, you have to make sure that no one's necessarily being forced to the table, and you're not favoring one group too much over another. But how can city governments kind of recreate this Greek idea of the agora, or the public forum, where a lot of different interests and voices are heard? I think that's a wonderful mission and something to be on the city agenda, so that cities concentrate not just on service delivery, but on a particular quality of deliberative public life. I think that's a very important mission for city governments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's very interesting, the debate about technology. As a mayor, I have received like 200 offers of the big companies about you need to have a smart city, this is my technology. But at the end of the day, don't misunderstand me, I do love technology and I use it the whole day and for a lot of things also in the city hall. So,
and all your constituents have your cell phone number.
Yes, of course, that's it. That's I think they don't need a cell phone to call me, but they do have my number in every paper magazine in the town. So that connection, it's really easy. But at the end of the day, the smartest movement is to let people touch each other. It has something special, and it's something special about the cities. That messy situation, that romantic thing about the city where you can go to public spaces and get together with people that maybe is going to be very interesting for you, and they can let you know about their thoughts. And that thing is, wow, it's very powerful. And that's the debate also about the little towns and the big city, which is going on now. You said that before. We have a lot of technology to talk to everyone all around the world. We can have very important meetings with the screen here and the mics, but the cities are getting more people. And the small villages are getting without people. So why is this happening? What's so special with the cities? It's that people need to touch each other. They need to go down to Gran Via and touch with other guy, or go to have a coffee and start a conversation. And that has also a lot to do with smart cities, because that's their smartest way to get related with other people. And you can use technology for that, of course. I think technology is very important to help this. But what's the outcome of a smart city? What's the goal? The goal is to let people live happier, to let people feel free to dream, to do what they want. And technology is very important for that, but that's not the goal. So that difference, it's very important to be aware of that, I think.
So I was speaking at a lunch engagement, and when we introduced ourselves, everyone was supposed to say the city that they most wanted. You know, if they could pick one city to spend the rest of their lives, what city would it be? And you'll be pleased to know that Madrid got more votes than any other single city. But people said places like Lisbon, London, Torino, which was kind of an offbeat choice. But mostly people had a reason that had to do with an experience they had in a city. The food is amazing there, or it's on the coast, or I spent some time there when I was young and it's important to me. No one said, I want to go to this particular city because it's got really fast broadband, or because there's a sensor everywhere and I can do everything with my phone. So people, I mean, what makes a city smart is the people, not the technology. And I do think that we are in an era where we're waking up from utopian dreams, climate change, political distress, a certain, almost like a hangover, right, from all of the technology that we've consumed so quickly, are asking us to pause and say, is this what we want? We built these things with great hope, but do we need to either resist or think about moving technology in a different direction, and again, making it subordinate to what else is important to our lives? There are ways in which technology asks us, in a sense, to amplify or increasingly value what it means to be human. And I try to refer to this in my remarks, that there are some things that only humans can do. So if we let technology do what technology is good at, then maybe humans will have more time and ability for humans to do what we're good at, right? Humans are not as good at technology at some kinds of repetitive tasks. Great, let the robots do those things, or let the artificial intelligence do those things. And let's start to value the work of humans. And what you'll find is that often the work that is very specifically human is caring work or interrelational work, that's been performed frequently by women, and it's not been highly valued in the professional realm, and it's not been well paid. So there might be a very interesting intersection between technology and care and valuing the work of women that we could talk about, and particularly in cities, this could play out in the advent of driverless cars, for example. Studies around driverless cars show that, or not around driverless cars, but if you look at kind of the sociology of cars and driving, you'll see that bus drivers and cab drivers often perform subtle caring functions. They get the luggage out. If you're an older person and you have a lot of packages, the cab driver might help you bring your packages to your front door. A bus driver, there's a sense that you know, things on the bus are being supervised, that interactions between people will not get out of hand. So if we move to autonomous vehicles without drivers, could we have a concierge or some kind of supervisor or caregiver on the bus or the cab to make the experience a little more pleasant, to make urban life a little more comfortable, to make people feel a bit more cared for? That could be an interesting question about what to do with some of the surplus labor that technology will create. Could we have a society focused more on care and well-compensated care?
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you can find an application which is asking you every 2 hours, how are you feeling, Jennifer? So if you want, we can go for a Q&A. I'm sure you have interesting questions and thought. One over there. We have some microphones. Yes, thank you.
So, hi, can you hear me well? Yes? Yes. Okay. Well, my name is Amelia, and thank you very much, Jennifer, for the speech. I'm passionate about smart cities. I will take the quote that smart cities is made by people and not by technology. I have a question for you. Last year, I was engaged on a project in Barcelona and on mobility. And sometimes I'm asking myself the readiness of the local governments to manage the challenges of urban cities. Because when looking at mobility, we realize that some of the big traffic congestion was caused by commuters. So you cannot take a policy just on the city itself. You need to have a conversation with the region. So suddenly you say, wow, well, now we need City Hall talking to, in that case, it was the Generalitat. So how do you make that conversation? Have you seen any city that is able to have that conversation at a state ground? Because if we say that in 2050, 70% of population will be in the cities, that cannot be purely a major responsibility to manage that challenge. So have you seen any conversation on that space that is not anymore a city conversation or a city problem, is a nation problem? Well, that's the question.
So there are some questions around, particularly transportation, that technology has not solved. I have often thought that the problems of autonomous vehicles are actually not related to the fact that there's not a driver, but maybe the people will be so dazzled by technology that they'll finally be able to change their behavior in ways that they should have done decades ago, right? So the question of how cities relate to the governments around them, around larger regional issues like transportation, like labor force, workforce training, are perennial ones in cities. When cities are doing very well, they don't want to talk to the suburbs. When cities are doing very poorly, the suburbs don't want to talk to them. And when the state or the region or whatever larger government comes in, both cities and suburbs say, "How dare you step on our areas of responsibility?" I don't know what will change this, other than traffic will become so unmanageable, someone will have to compromise. In Washington, D.C., for example, there's long been a conversation about funding of our public transit system, the metro. And finally, Washington, D.C. just went first and said, we will put in a lot more of our own dollars to fund metro. And then the suburban jurisdictions, the other states, came in. So I think that's a question of leadership, and perhaps the states or the region, the higher level of government saying, if you don't do it, we will. And again, so technology could be a lever or an opportunity to do things differently, but it won't itself cause people to necessarily be braver or more creative or, as I said, do what they need to do. And often people talk to me about data and data-driven government, and won't that change everything? And I say, no. People's behavior is not changed by data. If data changed behavior, everyone would floss their teeth every night. It's one of the most effective things you can do for your health. And nobody floss. I mean, I floss, but most people don't floss. So the ability of data itself to change behavior, I think, is vastly overrated.
I think it's just 1 minute, one very, very interesting debate about where is going to be the power. And as cities are getting bigger, but not just the city, but all the metropolitan area. For example, my town, I live 30 minutes from here by car. So most part of the people which is living in Soto del Real, they are working in Madrid. They came every day. So we are part of the same reality. We have the transport system, we have the healthcare system, everything. So I think that the power is going from the cities to the metropolitan level of power, which is not, we can't see exactly now, but that's the way it's moving, I think, in the next midterm. Next. Over there. I'm sorry, over there first.
Buenas tardes. Muchas gracias.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your presentation and for sharing with us your ideas about the smart cities. My question is around safety and security in smart cities, in the sense of safety more than security. And there's always a prospective vision that technology is going to help us make cities safer. And what do you think would be the key element so that in a city we can feel confident, we can feel relaxed, we can ask anyone at any hour of the day, where is my hotel, without feeling that we are under threat? And what do you think are the key elements when we compare that to different models? Because there are few cities of more than 15 million inhabitants where you can see that. You have the example of Tokyo, the Chinese model, where they have a completely different governance model, but it doesn't happen in Paris, in New York, in Los Angeles. And then we have the Spanish model, where Madrid is not so big, but there is a reasonable sense of safety and of sharing and humanity. What
Right now we are in Stanford world, and it seems that it's going to be like that. ¿Cuál cree que son las claves?
What do you think are the key elements for that?
Thank you. This isn't part of your question, but one of the things that we can do to make cities safer, particularly cities like the United States, is perfect autonomous vehicles, right? Because one of the most dangerous things that happens in cities is driving. Humans are bad drivers. We are better drivers than, say, cats or squirrels, but we are terrible drivers. So autonomous vehicles will help make cities safer. But I think your question goes to the issue more of social trust and whether it's social trust or surveillance that makes cities safer. I'm not particularly up to date on the research on this. It's my understanding that having cameras on every street corner is not a fail-safe solution, and certainly some people in the United States, people in African American communities feel much less safe under conditions of heavy surveillance because a threat to them comes from the police and the state itself. So I think that what makes for a safer city is probably a more equitable city, a city where there is a sense of social cohesion, a sense where there are perhaps not huge gaps in the quality of life and the quality of public provision between people who are wealthy and people who are poor. It's much easier to put up surveillance cameras than it is to increase social trust and social cohesion. But I think safety comes from a sense of shared experience and trust, and that we're all in it together. And again, that goes to this notion of time and culture. I have not seen a kind of killer app or all-purpose solution for security in cities. I don't believe it lies in facial recognition and social credits and those kind of authoritarian models that China is piloting. I hope that's not the answer. That can't be the answer. I think surveillance can help with some kinds of unusual or episodic violence, like terrorist attacks. But in terms of day-to-day street crime, I think that comes from more, from better and more sophisticated interpersonal policing, so that police and residents have better relationships, and then also just more equal relationships between residents themselves.
Thank you. It's very interesting. You know, every 6 months we have a meeting with the security forces coming from Madrid, and they are letting us know about the rates of the different crimes in our village. In the last 5 years, I've been mayor 4 years and a half. Every year, less houses robberies, less attacks in the streets. But what is unbelievable going up is being robbed on the online, in the electronic commerce. It's the hugest problem we have in our village, because a lot of people is starting to use the electronic system to buy things or tickets or whatever, and they're getting robbed. So that's very funny about technology. But in the classical security problems, I think that again the sense of community is which is helping you with safety at the local level. It's much easier in a little town than in a big city, of course. But you can build communities also in the big cities. You have the neighborhoods. If in a neighborhood people is getting involved in activities, they know each other, they're going out and they know people in the streets, in the bakeries, in the coffees, it's pretty much safer, that kind of society. What's next? Here, someone?
Hi, I'm Paula. So I'm from Medellin. I worked 4 years for the government there. And I was wondering, they created the fourth industrial revolution centers from the World Economic Forum. And in Medellin, we have like 70% low income communities, right? And now governments are starting to think about public policy. And it's very highly related to smart cities. So from the work at the Aspen Institute, what would you recommend a city who actually has all those problems as getting prepared for, I don't know, like focus more on social inequality, and having a lot of people who do not even know, I mean, they're not even involved in the conversations we're having right now. So what priorities do you see when we talk about public policy, for example, to kind of prepare cities and integrate more citizens into that whole strategy? Like what would you recommend those centers?
I think it's very important to know within a city who is and who is not connected, and what are they connected to, or what are they not connected to. So there's connections to work, there's connections to education, and then we can start to think about things like connections to the internet. I think that the city's strength are always in people, so I would prioritize education and supports for education. The challenge is once you start to unpack that, then you start to think not only about children, who we normally think about in terms of education, you have to think about their parents and what might be the obstacles that the parents are facing that keep them from getting their children to schools, which means you have to think about jobs and job readiness, and then you have to think about transportation systems. So it becomes difficult to know where to start, but I think it does have to do with increasing all of the levers to increase economic opportunity in cities, so that residents can find their way into larger economic and social systems and become connected and not disconnected. That's not a particularly novel answer. One of the challenges in the policy field is that we're always looking for the new answer, because we get tired of the time it takes to implement the old answer. In the United States, we've been talking about this problem for at least, well, I'm almost 50 and it predates my lifetime, so for 60 years. But these social divisions, again, particularly in the United States, where racism is such a stain and a wound in our country, it took us hundreds of years to build up these very powerful and successful systems of social exclusion. They won't go away after 5 years or one mayor's term. You have to work on them continually and continually and continually. So the answers don't necessarily change. Sometimes we have different tools for implementing the answer. But what we need most sometimes in public policy is a strange combination of patience to work on solutions and impatience with the problem. And how do you know where to be impatient and how to be patient? We can't keep switching tactics. I think it really does come down to, are people educated? Are they able to take advantage of opportunities? And can they easily move in a city from one place to another? Those are the three key aspects.
Thank you so much. I absolutely agree. I will have said, first of all, education, of course. And I will add just a little thing. The other thing in that kind of areas you need is hope, is to have a project, is to have something to work on. And that's, again, the community. We, in our town, we are a very rich town. It's nothing to do with that. But we have a part of the budget is choosing, it's proposed and chosen by the people. So if your budget is very little, at least a little part, you can let them think and know, what do we need here? We have that high rate of poverty, but we have something, just a little thing in which we can think and we can put our mind working on that, and maybe some other ideas are getting just thanks to this process. So I think that's a way also to put them together to think, and with that process you can have a lot of ideas out of that. Thanks so much. What else? Over there was some. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Do you hear me? My name is Jaime. First of all, I want to thank you for your speech, both the conference and then your speech. I was wondering, or your speech make me, Mr. Lobato, make me think something. It's regarding engagement. No, I'm coming from a small company in which engagement was very important. And I was thinking, I've been born in Madrid, and my wife is from Palencia, a small city, like maybe Soto del Real. And I think engagement on small cities is much higher than it's in big cities. And then I was thinking if it will happen the same, that with large companies, the engagement is shrinking, but there are some large companies, especially tech companies, which maintain that. So it's just an idea. I would like you to comment on that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I think the question was directed at you first.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. Engagement is a very powerful word to build and to develop. And I don't think it's a matter of how big is the city. You can do a lot of work in a big city. You have in Madrid, for example, you have 21 districts, and you have like, I don't know, 400 or 500 neighborhoods, little neighborhoods with 50,000 people. And in every neighborhood you have a very little city council, which is like our city council in Soto del Real. And with this city council, with a lot of organizations you have in that neighborhood, in the schools, protected environment, cultural organizations, you have all the things you need to build a community like that, to get that engagement, letting people work together, letting people think together and build together. It's not a problem of being a big city or a little town. Of course, in a little town, you have a thing that you start with a lot of people knowing each other because they are going to the same restaurants or they went together to the school or whatever. But you can build that also in a big city like Madrid. For example, that's that part of the budget that people can propose and choose. It's super easy to organize that. Super easy. You need work at the beginning, of course, but because of the cultural pillar, you have to let them understand that they can think out of their minds, they propose, and after that they all can vote together what proposal they want to develop. But I don't think it's a matter of being big or little.
No, I agree, and I do think the idea of participatory budgeting, which is what you're talking about, is slowly starting to take root, and that understanding of engagement. One of the challenges is that communities are either many governments want to do engagement, but they don't necessarily do it well. So they will ask people about things, but then not go back and tell people what they did with that information, so they don't close the feedback loop. Or they'll ask people the same questions over and over and over again. This is a particular challenge with low-income or underserved neighborhoods in the United States. People come and study them to death, and people say, we're not study subjects, we're not laboratory rats. Why do you keep asking us these same questions and nothing seems to change in our neighborhood? Or people want to engage residents only at the end of a planning process, when they've essentially decided what they're going to do, and then they go to the residents and say, isn't this a great idea that we're doing here? So engagement needs to be a continual process, a kind of, it's like any kind of relationship. It has to be steady and ongoing and not just around big occasions. It's hard to do that. It's hard to invest that time and energy in listening. But I think we're seeing a shift, again, away from the idea of the expert and into understanding that residents themselves are the experts about their own lives and the experts about their communities, and people are getting curious. It's still imperfect, but people are getting more curious about engaging with residents more on a day-to-day level, and through things like smaller local councils or tapping into community groups that already exist, they're able to learn and stay connected, not just around large projects, but again on a day-to-day basis.
José María, please.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of comments. Thank you so much for your remarks. Both of you, I learned a lot. I wanted to go back to your critique of efficiency, and I would go even further. I think that efficiency is always a discussion where we fail to ask the question, efficiency as to what? And who chose those goals? And why those goals and not different ones, right? Mm-hmm. And, it's about our goals as society, right? Not somebody's definition of means towards that particular set of goals, right? The second issue that comes to my mind, listening to all of you, is that perhaps the enduring city, the physical city, more and more will have to be organized in a way that compensates for the failures of technology to connect us. In so many ways, digital technology is helping, the world, but in other ways, it's also creating these echo chambers and this polarization and this feeling that, increased fragmentation and isolation. So perhaps one of the goals of the enduring city is precisely, and I really like when you talk about, how play is part of being human, right? And play is always play with someone. And the enduring city, in that sense, has a very important function or mission in our technological age, which is to compensate for the effects of fragmentation of technology.
Yes. I agree. I do think that for so long that the efficiency was this notion, and we forgot that it's not better to do the wrong thing more quickly and more easily. It's very hard to step back and ask these ultimate questions, particularly in the day-to-day of city government, and that's why I appreciate working at a place like the Aspen Institute, where we can occasionally bring people from many sectors, but including government, to step back and ask why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? And I do think we've lost a bit this sense of public dialogue around why. We tend to assume that faster is better. We tend to assume that things that are new are better. And that's not always the case. And so if we can develop a kind of public or civic habit of not just voting, for example, or volunteering, or being, gracious to people on the subway or the metro, but asking a kind of constructive why, not necessarily skeptical, just asking people asking elected officials or others, technologists, to explain why are we doing this in particular. And the notion of play as something that's not just for children, but that is important for all humans, I think is especially important. And again, not just play on your phones with whatever Candy Crush or I don't even know what they play now. But the notion of urban life as an arena for play. Certainly, coming from the U.S., it's very easy to see that Europeans just dress much better in public. There is a sense of being on stage and kind of an urban pageant. And if we can get that notion again of public life and behaving in public in a generous and playful way, I think that will also make our cities more enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting about the public spaces in the cities. Last week, a member of the city council just came to me and said, we need to build some special benches for the young people in different heights so they can sit down and use their phones. And it's like, the benches are for people to talk, not to use the phone. So that's crazy. But about the public spaces, it's very interesting how you decide at the door of the school. If you build just a little sidewalk to let people go to the cars and go home, or you're building a huge sidewalk to let people just go out of the school and stop there and talk to your neighbor and how is your life doing or what are you doing next week. And that's so easy. It's just you can choose a 1 meter sidewalk or a 20 meters sidewalk. It's just a decision. No more money, it's super easy. And that kind of things are if you have the vision, you can do that, and it's no big effort.
And I think that certainly the designers of technology, the apps, the platforms, they're making all kinds of choices to keep us on what you might call narrow, using that metaphor, to keep us on narrow sidewalks, to keep us deeply engaged with that platform, to tap into the reward centers and the certain chemical triggers in our brains. So I think as we design public life, we can be appropriately just as aggressive in designing things for human interaction and play in space. Because again, technology is not neutral. There's a reason we're all glued to our phones. They're designed for that. And so if we can design compelling experiences offline, I think that's what we have to do to create a more balanced experience of human life.
Okay, maybe just a couple of questions. The last. Yeah, I think we have time for the last question. No.
I think
someone.
Yes, can I take it? Okay. Thank you so much for this very different take on smart cities and what it could be for the future city. My question is kind of drawing from what you said on equity and how I think that maybe technology or digital technologies in our urban societies are not necessarily addressing the challenges of our contemporary life, but maybe bringing different issues. We've seen with Airbnb how it has also impacted the local population in so many ways that are not necessarily positive, or how the problem of disconnection through digital technologies and how loneliness is increasingly becoming a topic in our urban realities. And so how it's not necessarily creating a better environment, but maybe just creating different problems. And in terms of that, how we have such a global platform to talk about technology and urban life. And it seems that all of these trends are very much global, and the challenges are very much local. The realities that affect, for example, the city of Washington in terms of racism or gentrification are so different. Or I also come from Mexico City, and we have informality is part of our urban reality in mega city, and yet we also want to market ourselves like the city of Guadalajara as the digital city, and it's the same type of conferences on the same technologies, and yet the challenges are so local, so different, and it seems frustrating that they are maybe deepening social divides or inequality, and maybe the lessons that we're learning here very rapidly from these technological changes are not being applied to other regions in the world where this technology is arriving, and maybe going to create the same challenges but at a much greater scale.
So when I arrived in Madrid yesterday, the thing I always do when I fly across the ocean is get out and walk, right? And to just try to counteract the effects of jet lag. And I was a bit disturbed to see all of the shop windows talk about Black Friday sales. Because to my mind, coming from the United States, Black Friday is closely associated with the American holiday of Thanksgiving, which is kind of our big national holiday. So what was it doing here in Spain? I mean, a sale is a great thing, sure, but there is this idea that we are losing the value of the local in the global. And Airbnb is a particularly ironic example, right? Because what they are marketing is an authentic experience, not a packaged, branded, anonymous experience, but a deeply local experience. But then they are kind of eradicating some areas of local culture or, the things that make a city very specific. And I don't know how cities will necessarily create that balance. Particularly as, the internet allows us to move kinds of ideas and a notion of what urban looks like these days to around and around. I do think cities can learn from each other. I think cities do better learning from each other than they do necessarily from experts like me. One of the best things I can do is tell people in cities, talk to Barcelona about how to create a kind of urban lab. Talk to Medellin and Cartagena around certain changes in bike lanes. Talk to, I think Paris was the place that first started a viable bike share system. So cities do learn from other cities. The challenge is understanding what to standardize and what has to be very specific and cultural and local. But I think that goes back to the larger question of engagement. The more cities listen to residents, the more they'll know how to adjust a particular intervention or policy to meet local needs. There has to, it can't be that if there are a million cities, there are a million entirely different solutions, but there might be a million expressions of 15 or 20 kinds of solutions or kinds of solution sets. And the trick, as always, is to understand what will work in what place and what won't. What we're coming to learn is that social science is not like biological science. You cannot necessarily judge from one randomized controlled trial what the best kind of intervention is, because people and culture are more difficult to discern. I think that's what makes cities, though, so fascinating and draws so much attention and energy to them, is trying to figure out where they're somewhat alike and where they're different, and what that means for the human experience within them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I will say just that if you want to be a smart city, you have to be aware. You have the responsibility to be aware that every local decision, every everyday little decision is affecting to the long term and globally. So you have to be aware of that and being responsible with every decision, because the big global issues depends on local decisions. So I just want to thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been a very, very interesting experience, and thank you all for being here, and especially thank you, José María and Fundación Telefónica, Silvia. Thank you so much, Aspen Spain and Fundación Telefónica. Thank you. See you next time.